Ivanka tried to dismiss every problem, blaming African critics for propaganda. Jasmine waited, then asked one quiet question that took all the noise away. It was a bright afternoon in Washington, D.C., the kind of day that felt charged with anticipation. The city was buzzing, not because of politics for once, but because of a rare event that promised to bring together two very different worlds. On the stage that day were Ivanka Trump and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Both were powerful women in their own right, but their styles couldn't have been more different. Ivanka was elegance and composure personified. Dressed in a fitted white suit, her expression calm, her tone always controlled. She was the daughter of President Donald Trump, a businesswoman and a public figure who had spent years balancing her image between political influence and polished professionalism. People admired her poise, but some saw her as distant, someone who spoke more from a place of privilege than lived experience. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, sharp, confident, and unafraid to speak the uncomfortable truth. She had built her career on passion, purpose, and standing up for those who often felt ignored by power. With her bold voice and fiery personality, Jasmine represented a new generation of leadership, one that wasn't afraid to call things as they were. The event, titled Women in Leadership, Building the Future Together, was meant to be a celebration of progress. But even before it began, everyone in the audience sensed that something more intense was about to unfold. The seats were packed, the cameras were rolling, and the energy in the room felt electric, a mix of curiosity and tension. The moderator introduced both women with praise, highlighting their achievements. Ivanka smiled gracefully and gave a polite nod. Jasmine, on the other hand, folded her hands and looked directly into the crowd as if preparing to speak not to them but with them. When it was Ivanka's turn to speak first, she stood and began in her usual composed tone. "Leadership," she said softly, "is about grace, vision, and understanding the power of patience." Her voice was steady, her words carefully chosen. She spoke about her experiences working with her father in the White House, her efforts in supporting small businesses, and her belief that progress comes through unity and discipline. Her points were polished and diplomatic, the kind of language that usually kept audiences calm and agreeable. She talked about the importance of family values and how women could balance both strength and tenderness in leadership. Every sentence sounded like it had been practiced, almost rehearsed to perfection. But as she continued, some people in the audience began to shift slightly in their seats. It wasn't that her message was wrong. It just felt detached. While she spoke about empowerment, many couldn't ignore the gap between her words and the reality they lived every day. Then came the moment that set the tone for the rest of the event. The moderator turned to Jasmine Crockett and said, "Congresswoman, how would you respond to that?" Jasmine didn't rush. She took a brief pause, adjusted her mic, and smiled faintly before standing. Her presence alone demanded attention. When she began to speak, her voice was full and grounded, the kind that carried emotion without needing to shout. She started by agreeing that leadership does require patience. But she quickly shifted the focus. "Patience," she said, "means nothing if people are waiting for promises that never come true." The audience immediately straightened up. Jasmine went on to talk about the problems people were facing daily. Rising costs, struggling families, and the growing divide between those in power and those trying to survive. Unlike Ivanka, she didn't quote statistics or policy terms. She told real stories of people she'd met, of single parents juggling two jobs, of young students who had dreams but no opportunities. She spoke from the heart and the crowd could feel it. There was honesty in her words that didn't need polish. As Jasmine spoke, Ivanka sat with her usual composed look, though there was a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. She wasn't used to being challenged so directly in such a public space. Jasmine's words weren't rude or aggressive. They were just deeply real. When Jasmine finished, the room broke into applause. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was the kind of applause that came from people who had been waiting to hear something genuine. But the story didn't end there. As the clapping died down, Ivanka leaned forward, her smile tightening. The audience didn't know it yet, but she was about to interrupt to take back control of the narrative. She was known for her calm but strategic approach, and this was her moment to reassert it. In that single breath before she spoke again, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Everyone could sense that the polite panel discussion had turned into something far more personal. Two women, two voices, two very different worlds colliding. And that's how it began. A moment that would soon grow into one of the most unforgettable confrontations in modern political storytelling. The calm before the storm had ended and the storm was about to begin. The applause faded and for a few seconds there was complete silence. Jasmine Crockett stood with her chin lifted slightly, her eyes steady. She looked at the crowd as if she could see every person there, not just faces, but stories. When she began to speak again, her voice carried warmth, but it also carried weight. "I hear a lot about grace and patience," she said, her tone even, but filled with conviction. "But grace doesn't mean silence, and patience doesn't mean waiting forever for things that should have changed long ago." The crowd leaned in. There was something magnetic about her words, the way she spoke without trying to impress anyone. Every sentence seemed to come from a place of real experience, not from talking points or careful rehearsals. Jasmine painted a picture of the nation as it stood, not the polished version often shown on stage, but the one people actually lived in. She talked about families juggling rent and bills, about young people losing faith in promises, about small towns forgotten after elections. Leadership, she continued, isn't about photo opportunities or polished speeches. It's about rolling up your sleeves and getting dirt under your nails. If that's what it takes to help people. A few heads nodded in the front row. A woman in the audience wiped away a tear. Jasmine's words struck nerves because they weren't just ideas. They were reflections of truth. She paused for a moment, allowing her words to breathe. "I've walked into schools where teachers buy their own supplies because the funding never makes it to their classrooms," she said. "I've sat with parents who tell their kids not to dream too big because they're scared of how hard that fall might be." Her tone deepened. "And I've seen how easy it is for people in power to talk about patience when they've never had to wait for a meal or wait for justice or wait for their turn to be heard." The audience didn't move. Every eye was on her. What made Jasmine's speech powerful wasn't volume, it was precision. She chose her words carefully, shaping them like quiet lightning. Her voice rose only slightly when she said, "We can't keep pretending everything's fine when so many people are just trying to survive another day." Then she turned her attention to leadership itself, the topic Ivanka had spoken about so smoothly earlier. "Leadership isn't about standing above people and telling them to work harder," Jasmine said. "It's about standing beside them and saying, 'I see you, I hear you, and I'll fight for you.'" A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Even those who came expecting a polished discussion about success and empowerment now realized they were witnessing something else entirely, something raw, honest, and necessary. Jasmine took a small breath and continued. "Some leaders think being calm under pressure means avoiding uncomfortable truths, but real calm isn't about pretending problems don't exist. It's about facing them with courage and refusing to let fear dictate who gets to speak and who doesn't." The way she said it wasn't confrontational, but everyone could feel the weight of her message. Without naming names, she had drawn a line in the sand, and Ivanka Trump was standing on the other side of it. Still, Jasmine didn't rush to attack. She kept her focus on the people in front of her, not the woman across from her. "We talk about opportunity," she went on. "But opportunity without fairness is just a dream for some and a struggle for others. We talk about equality, but equality doesn't mean much if those who need it most can't afford to wait for it." Her rhythm was natural, slow enough to feel, steady enough to hold attention. The audience wasn't just listening. They were absorbing. Every pause, every glance, every shift in tone drew them deeper into her message. Then she added softly, "I know what it feels like to be talked over, to have your words dismissed before they even leave your mouth. But the thing about truth is, and it waits. It doesn't need to shout. It just stands there patient until people finally see it." Those words seemed to linger in the air. Even Ivanka's expression changed slightly. Her polite smile faltered just for a second. Jasmine's message wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about presence, dignity, and courage. By the time Jasmine finished, the entire atmosphere of the room had changed. The people weren't just an audience anymore. They were witnesses. Witnesses to someone standing up unafraid in front of privilege and power and speaking for those who couldn't be in that room. When she closed her speech, Jasmine didn't try to end with a quote or a slogan. She simply said, "Leadership isn't a title. It's a responsibility. And if you can't carry the weight of people's struggles, then you're not leading. You're just standing in the way." The silence that followed was deep and full of emotion. For a heartbeat, no one clapped. They were too stunned, too moved. Then slowly the applause began. Soft at first, then building until it filled the entire hall. Ivanka Trump sat still, her fingers clasped together. She smiled, but there was something strained about it. She had been in the public eye long enough to recognize a turning point when she saw one. Jasmine Crockett had just shifted the room, and the next few minutes would decide whether Ivanka could shift it back. As the sound of applause filled the hall, Ivanka Trump kept her expression perfectly composed. She had been trained her entire life to stay calm under pressure. Whether in interviews, meetings, or public debates, she knew that control was her greatest asset. But inside, she could feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, a challenge that couldn't be brushed aside with charm or politeness. When the room finally settled, Ivanka leaned forward slightly and took the microphone. "Thank you, Congresswoman," she began, her tone soft yet deliberate. "Your passion is admirable, truly. But I think what's often missing in these discussions is perspective." Her voice was calm and measured, the way it always was, but there was a subtle sharpness beneath it. "It's easy," she continued, "to stand on a stage and point out what's wrong. It's much harder to recognize how much progress has actually been made. Our country isn't perfect, and no nation is. But it's far from the disaster someone want to portray." She gave a small confident smile as she looked around the room. "We have lower unemployment, stronger businesses, and growing communities. That doesn't sound like a nation in crisis to me." For a moment, a few people clapped more out of politeness than agreement. Ivanka took that as her cue to press further. "I think sometimes," she said, "criticism turns into exaggeration. And when that happens, it doesn't help anyone. It only divides us." Then, without warning, she made a remark that sent an uneasy wave through the audience. "A lot of the negativity we hear," she said, "comes from people who don't even live here. Foreign groups, mostly African or international voices spreading false narratives about our country. We need to be careful who we listen to." The words hung heavy in the air. For a few seconds, no one reacted. It wasn't just what she said, but how casually she said it, as if the statement were common sense. A few gasps broke the silence, followed by a low murmur. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She sat still, her eyes locked on Ivanka, studying her. Ivanka, sensing the shift, kept going. "I believe in this country," she said, her tone slightly firmer now. "And I believe that those who truly care about it should focus on solutions, not on painting it as broken or corrupt. That kind of talk weakens us, especially when it comes from within." She turned slightly toward Jasmine, her smile returning. "We need to lift people up, not bring them down with fear or blame." It was subtle, but the message was clear. Ivanka wasn't just disagreeing. She was undermining Jasmine's credibility, suggesting that her speech had been fueled by negativity rather than leadership. The moderator shifted in their seat, clearly aware that things had taken a tense turn. But Ivanka wasn't finished. "I come from a family that believes in action," she said, her voice growing steadier with every sentence. "My father has always taught me that talk is cheap. Real change comes from hard work and loyalty. That's what true leadership is about, and that's what I try to represent." It was the kind of line that usually drew applause. But this time, only a few polite claps echoed. The rest of the audience was silent, their attention now fixed on Jasmine. Ivanka noticed it, too. For the first time, she seemed slightly uneasy. Her fingers tightened around the microphone, but she quickly forced another smile. "I don't mean to dismiss anyone's experiences," she added smoothly. "But I think we all need to remember that America's story is one of success, not struggle. And it's important that we keep that perspective alive." The tension in the room grew heavier with each word. Some nodded along with Ivanka's optimism, but most looked uncomfortable. Her comments about foreign nationals had crossed an invisible line. It wasn't the confident vision of hope people expected. It came off as detached, even defensive. Still, Ivanka wasn't backing down. She had built her reputation on remaining polished even when others lost control. "Negativity," she said, "and has never built anything. So, I choose to focus on what works, not on what's broken." She ended her statement with a composed smile, then placed the microphone down as if she had just completed a lesson rather than a rebuttal. For a long, silent moment, the audience didn't know how to react. Some exchanged glances, others looked at Jasmine, waiting for her to respond. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about tone, about respect, about the power of words. Ivanka's speech had been strong, yes, but not in the way she intended. Her confidence came across as arrogance. Her defense of the nation felt like denial of its pain, and her calmness, which usually won people over, now felt cold compared to Jasmine's sincerity. Yet even after all that, Jasmine remained quiet. Her hands rested calmly on the table, her expression unreadable. It was as if she were waiting, not out of hesitation, but strategy. Ivanka glanced at her, perhaps expecting an immediate retort, but Jasmine didn't move. She simply smiled faintly, her silence louder than any interruption could have been. That quiet confidence unsettled Ivanka more than any argument could. She had thrown every well-practiced phrase she had, and somehow Jasmine's stillness had turned the spotlight right back onto her. The clash wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. But in that moment, everyone watching realized something crucial. Ivanka might have the microphone, but Jasmine had the room. The silence that followed Ivanka's speech wasn't the kind of silence that comes from respect. It was the heavy charge kind, the kind that comes right before a storm. The air seemed thick with expectation. Every eye in the room turned toward Jasmine Crockett, waiting for her to respond, but she didn't, at least not right away. Instead, Jasmine sat still, her hands folded lightly in front of her. Her expression was calm, but her eyes told a different story. They weren't angry, they were calculating. She knew exactly what Ivanka had done. The remarks about foreign nationals and the polished dismissal of negativity weren't just words. They were meant to undermine her, to make her look emotional, ungrateful, and out of touch with real leadership. Jasmine understood something Ivanka didn't. Sometimes silence is louder than a speech. As the seconds ticked by, the room grew more uncomfortable. Ivanka shifted slightly in her chair, trying to maintain her poised look. The moderator looked from one woman to the other, unsure whether to move on or let the tension breathe. Finally, Jasmine lifted her microphone. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, almost too quiet. She began. There's something powerful about perspective. The audience straightened up instantly. Her tone was calm, but it carried a kind of strength that made people lean in to hear. Perspective, she continued, depends on where you're standing. From a penthouse, the world can look perfect, but if you're standing in the street breathing in the dust, it's a very different view, the crowd murmured softly, recognizing the meaning behind her words. Jasmine looked toward Ivanka with a small, respectful smile. You talk about progress, and yes, some progress has been made. But let's be honest about who that progress has reached. When you say everything's fine, I can't help but wonder, fine for who? Her words didn't carry bitterness. They carried truth. And truth has a way of cutting through even the most practiced politeness. She turned her gaze back to the audience. Some of you here know what it's like to wait. To wait for fairness, to wait for recognition, to wait for your hard work to mean something. You've been patient, haven't you? A wave of agreement moved through the crowd, quiet but unmistakable. Jasmine continued, her tone steady. People keep telling you to wait for change, to wait for things to get better, to be patient. But patience without progress isn't strength. It's suffering disguised as virtue. Ivanka tried to maintain her composed expression, but her jaw tightened ever so slightly. Jasmine saw it and she knew this was her moment. Then, almost casually, Jasmine added, You mentioned misinformation earlier. You said people from Africa or other nations are spreading false stories about this country. She paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. That's interesting because I've met people from those places. They aren't spreading lies. They're just telling their truth. The kind of truth that makes the comfortable uncomfortable. The crowd reacted again, not loudly, but with a low hum of approval. Jasmine's control of the room was complete now. But she wasn't done. She looked back at Ivanka, her tone suddenly gentler. Since you care about truth, Ivanka, let me ask you something honest. She paused again, and the room went still. Tell Baron you are his real mom. Gas rippled through the audience like a shock wave. For a split second, no one breathed. Even the air felt frozen. Ivanka's face went pale. She blinked, caught off guard in a way that words couldn't hide. Her hand twitched near the microphone as if she wanted to respond instantly, but nothing came out. The calm mask she wore so well began to crack. Jasmine didn't move. Her expression stayed neutral, almost serene. The power in her voice came not from aggression, but from certainty. She wasn't taunting, she was exposing, and the entire audience could feel it. Ivanka finally gathered herself, forcing a shaky smile. "I'm sorry," she said lightly, though her voice trembled just enough to betray her. "That's a rather personal and baseless statement, and frankly, it says more about you than it does about me." Jasmine tilted her head slightly unfazed. "Maybe," she said calmly. "But you seem so sure about other people's stories. I just wanted to see how it feels when someone questions yours." The room erupted, not in laughter, but in the kind of stunned reaction that happens when something real pierces through the surface. Even those who had come in skeptical of Jasmine now saw her differently. She wasn't just bold, she was fearless. Ivanka tried to recover, deflecting with a light chuckle. "I prefer to keep my family out of politics," she said. "But it's interesting how quickly some people will reach for rumors when they run out of reason." Jasmine smiled faintly. "Oh, I have plenty of reasons," she replied. "And I don't need rumors. I deal in reality, the kind most people can't afford to ignore." That was it. The moment when the balance of power shifted completely, Ivanka had walked into this discussion thinking she could outtalk her opponent with experience, confidence, and charm. But Jasmine had something stronger. Timing, presence, and truth. She waited. She listened. And when she finally struck, it wasn't loud or messy. It was precise. That was the turning point. When Ivanka Trump, known for her composure, found herself speechless. And Jasmine Crockett, with nothing but patience and truth on her side, had just taken control of the entire room. The room had fallen into an uneasy silence after Jasmine's sharp question. Every person present felt the tension rippling through the air, invisible yet undeniable. Ivanka Trump, usually unflappable, had been caught off guard. Her polished confidence faltered for just a moment, and that single moment changed everything. She tried to recover, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That was quite the creative question," she said, her voice coated with a thin layer of humor that no one found funny. "But let's be serious here. I believe discussions like these should stay focused on ideas, not personal attacks." It was a careful attempt to take control again, to shift the attention away from what had just happened. But Jasmine wasn't fooled, and neither was the audience. The power in the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. Ivanka's tone grew sharper as she continued. "I understand emotions can run high," she said. "Especially when people don't have the same level of experience in real leadership or decision-making." There it was, the insult disguised as advice. A faint murmur rippled through the audience. Ivanka was trying to paint Jasmine as emotional, inexperienced, maybe even unqualified. It was a tactic she'd used before. Graceful on the surface, dismissive underneath. But Jasmine Crockett had been underestimated her entire life, and she knew exactly how to handle it. She took her time before replying, her calm presence making Ivanka's polished aggression seem even more hollow. "Experience," Jasmine said softly, "isn't just what happens in boardrooms or private meetings. Experience is what you learn when the system doesn't work for you, and you still find a way to survive." Her voice grew stronger. "You see, some of us don't get invited to the table. We have to build our own piece by piece while others are born sitting at it." The audience stirred, their energy rising again. Ivanka crossed her legs, her expression tightening. "Well," she said with a touch of arrogance, "maybe if people worked harder instead of blaming others, they wouldn't have to build anything." That was the moment the audience turned. The polite atmosphere dissolved. It wasn't anger. It was disbelief. People exchanged looks, their faces reflecting disappointment. What had once sounded confident now came across as out of touch. Jasmine didn't miss a beat. She nodded slowly as if she had expected that response all along. "You're right," she said, her tone deceptively calm. "People do have to work hard, but it's a lot easier to talk about hard work when you start on the third base." Laughter and applause burst from the crowd, not mocking, but relieved, as though someone had finally said what they were all thinking. Ivanka's cheeks flushed slightly, and she straightened her posture. She tried to fire back. "I didn't come here to be insulted," she said stiffly. "I came here to uplift women and talk about solutions, not to engage in petty remarks." Jasmine smiled. That same slow, deliberate smile that always meant she was about to make her point. And yet, she replied, you've managed to insult a whole lot of people who don't have your privilege. Funny how that works. Ivanka's jaw tightened again. She shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable. Privilege is an excuse people use to justify failure, she said coldly. The crowd gasped. The line was too harsh, too blunt. What was meant to make her sound strong only made her sound cruel. Jasmine let the silence stretch before responding. If that's what you believe, she said softly, then maybe you've been privileged for so long, you forgot what struggle looks like. The words hit like thunder. Ivanka's composure cracked further. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice wavered. You really think you can define me? You don't know where I come from. Jasmine's eyes didn't move from hers. Oh, I know enough, she said quietly. Enough to see fear when it's trying to hide behind a smile. Ivanka blinked. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. Jasmine turned back to the audience, her tone measured, but cutting. I don't say this to embarrass anyone, she began. I say this because truth doesn't need permission. When someone uses their power to look down on others, they forget that the ground they're standing on was built by those same people they dismiss. The room erupted in applause again, louder this time. Ivanka's expression hardened, but there was no recovering now. The audience wasn't on her side anymore. And then Jasmine delivered her final line, the one that would stay in everyone's mind long after the event ended. She looked straight into the cameras, then spoke as if addressing someone far beyond the room. If Baron needs proof, she said firmly, come to me. The words were soft, but they landed with the weight of a hammer. The audience gasped once more, then fell completely silent. Ivanka's face turned pale. She looked stunned, not just by the boldness of the statement, but by the certainty behind it. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat, didn't linger. She simply placed the microphone down and took a small step back, her presence unshaken. The power of her restraint made her words echo even louder in everyone's mind. Ivanka tried to regain her footing, forcing a brittle laugh. That's absurd, she said quickly. Completely absurd. But her voice had lost its confidence. Jasmine didn't reply. She didn't have to. The moderator quickly tried to close the discussion, thanking both speakers, but the audience's attention was fixed entirely on Jasmine Crockett. She had entered the room as a challenger. She was leaving it as the victor, not because she shouted the loudest, but because she stood her ground when it mattered most. Ivanka Trump had tried to outtalk Jasmine Crockett, but by the end, it was clear Jasmine didn't need to outtalk her. She simply needed to outthink her, outlast her, and let truth do the rest.